Today, on this episode of The Crossover, we will be discussing the road from Navy SEAL to entrepreneur with serial entrepreneur, best selling author, and former Navy SEAL Mike Janke. Learn how this special operations warrior transitioned into an accomplished visionary, utilizing his self discipline and leadership skills. Much more on this episode of The Crossover. Good afternoon, everyone. Going to be talking with Mike Janke today, one of the most accomplished people you'll ever listen to. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Rick, how you doing, sir?
I'm good, man. Everything going all right?
Everything's going great, Doc. How about you?
Everything's going great. I'm going to do a brief intro just while everyone's logging on here. We have the pleasure of speaking with Mike Janke today, who, as I said before you logged on to everyone, is one of the most talented individuals you'll ever meet. And I'm going to just go over a brief intro here. Mike is currently co-founder of DataTribe, which is a firm that invests in cybersecurity, AI, and data science. He's also founder and former CEO of Silent Circle, the world's leading global secure communication service, and makers of Blackphone, which was a Time magazine's top 10 invention of the year. Of note, he was awarded Visionary of the Year for the Center for Democracy and Technology. His other endeavors also include founding Blue Pacific Studios, which is an LA-based film production firm, as well as SOC-USA, which is one of the country's largest defense logistics and security firms. He's also author of 2 books on self-discipline, leadership, and performance. And of note, he's also a former Navy SEAL Team 6 member, which we'll get into how his background kind of stemmed from that. Given all of his accomplishments, it's no surprise that Mike speaks around the world on technology, defense, and privacy. And he's here today to discuss his amazing transition from Navy SEAL to entrepreneur, having started multiple companies, been incredibly successful in that business sector, and how his SEAL training and background led to all that. So psyched to have you on, Mike.
Hey, thanks, Doc. Really appreciate being here. I'm honored.
Well, for those people who don't know what it takes to be a Navy SEAL, just go over a very brief summary of if someone wants to become a Navy SEAL, what are the steps and what are the training requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, it's nowadays you see it all in the movies and everything. But the reality is it's a really, really long process. So they may have 10,000 applicants. Those people have to score of those 10,000 in the top 1% for all written exams, right? From that 10,000, they whittle it down to about 118 to 120 that actually get orders to what's called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL School. You show up there. I started with, I want to say, 117. Long story short, towards the end of it, I think there were 13 of us that were original out of that. From there, you're still not a SEAL. After 10 months doing that, you do free fall, you do basic parachuting, a couple other things, and then you go to your SEAL team, and you're still an FNG or a freaking new guy, and you do another 10 months. At the time, it was called SEAL Tactical Training with the other new guys, and then you actually take a week-long test in front of your peers before you actually become a SEAL. So you're looking at like 2 years, right? And there's a misconception, Doc, that it's always these huge muscular, they're the fastest, the best shots. That's not true. If the best way I could liken it to, most of the SEALs are not 6'3", 270 pounds. The average height is about 6 foot. In an animal kingdom, it's more like fox than it is a bear. Although in the movies, everyone's got bulging biceps, and so it's a long process. A lot of the movies like to be grandiose about it, but it hovers since its inception, 1961, 62, at about a 7% pass rate of the 120 that were called out of 10,000. So there is some luck to it.
I mean, it's kind of amazing because just like you said, it's not necessarily the physical endurance. What I've heard from multiple SEALs that it really is about mental fortitude. And can you just elaborate a little bit about that?
Sure. Sure. I would tend to say it's 75-25, 75 mental, 25 physical. The physical is a thing, right? There were some things that I just thought, my God, for instance, drown proofing. People think it's physical. They tie your hands behind your back, your feet are tied. It's a 15-foot deep pool with viewing areas around, and there are divers, right? And a doctor and nurse come out with heart paddles off to the side. They tie you up, you jump in, you have to dolphin 200 yards, and then you do bobbing. Again, your hands and feet are tied behind your back.
Go crazy.
Right? And you go down, you bob, you go in circles. And after all that, they throw a mask in near you. It goes down to 15 feet. You go down on your knees, pick it up, come up, and you got to tread water, and then they point to you, you're out. It's all mental. It is not physical at all. And that was one of the hardest challenge. People see that in movies, and they're like, oh, my God, there's no way I can do it. Let me tell you right now, it has nothing to do with the physical. It's all mental. And you see that a lot. In my class, I remember there were former NFL safeties that were young that had blew their knees out that quit in the first week. Water polo captains from UCLA quit in the first week. It's about the mental capacity and discipline. In my mind, I went through it with, they're going to have to kill me. I will not quit. I'll die before I quit. Now, your brain is challenged a few times throughout that blanket statement, but it's mental.
That's so awesome to hear. I could talk all day about that. Was there something that triggered you to be a SEAL? When did you decide to be a SEAL?
That's a great question. I get that quite a bit. Well, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Pennsylvania. Our closest neighbors were a mile away on a dirt road, and they were Amish. So I was in the woods with a shotgun. I got my first shotgun at 9 years old for Christmas, right? Very different than today. And so a lot of my time was spent in the woods. It was spent hunting. It was spent exploring. And so from there, I got a scholarship to the University of Pittsburgh. I grew up on a farm. My parents couldn't afford to go to school. And back in those days in the SEAL teams, very different than today. They recruited word of mouth, college athletes, wrestlers, football, swimmers. And I was working at a martial arts studio at outside the University of Pittsburgh to help pay for my school, and it was owned by a SEAL from Vietnam. There was no Google. There was no phones to search. We're talking mid-'80s. And I'd have to go to the school library to pull up, what in the world is this, right? And I remember one night I'm cleaning the martial arts studio, and he brings a couple of bottles of whiskey and shots and put them on the table. And he says, yes, some guests. And these 4 guys show up on Harleys, 2 with wooden legs. Each of them had done 3 tours in Nam in the SEAL teams. And I would sit off in the corner and I'm listening to this stuff going, what is this? This is insane. And I was hooked. And I did not want the normal life. So I never graduated college. I left once I got orders to Buds, and I never looked back. Now, that's not a great message for young people today, especially my daughter, but it was a different day and age then.
I mean, I would say it's a great message. And I would say when something grabs you like that, you got to be passionate about it. And
you're right.
Whether it's in high school or college or in graduate school, if something grabs you, you gotta follow that. Now, I kind of want to talk about, you mentioned the SEALs training, and then as a SEAL, you also go through life and death experiences that pretty much no one else on the planet Earth goes through. How has that molded you as a leader now, because you've been such a successful entrepreneur?
It's a really tough question, Rick, because you know this. To look where you have gotten and what you do. The hardest thing to see is yourself. Those of us like yourself that are lucky to be married to great women, they help us see ourselves. But generally, the hardest thing is to see yourself. There's no doubt that my role 6 times as a CEO and founder before I started a venture firm, everything I mostly learned about leadership, I drew the similes for starting companies. My first company was a defense firm right before 9/11. Who would have thought? 5 years later, I have 8,300 employees in 23 countries, and we're doing 500 million a year. And I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I have a triple ulcer, my hair's falling out. I was more comfortable deploying than being back, testified in front of Congress, all those things. And so the idea that I learned around the leadership, and some of it, you don't notice what you're doing, but you directly correlate it. Wow, that makes sense. By way of example, when I was at SEAL Team 6, it's like a professional sports team. Less than 2%, I think it is, of SEALs end up at SEAL Team 6. And you were surrounded by the fastest, smartest, most experienced. The average age is 31 there, right? So I got to see how leadership there was different. Some of the people, if we're on a mission, are probably the world's greatest explosive breachers. Some of them are the greatest tacticians, some of the best snipers, shots. Each of those people, because of their expertise and combat experience, would design and lead that part of the mission, regardless of rank. So when I took that out to business, the key idea behind it is what we say in the SEAL teams: every human has flat sides. So think of a round, yoga roller ball or something. Every human has flat sides, things you're not good at, blind spots. Ego blocks you from doing this or that. The key is to surround yourself with the people who fill in, are better at those things than you. That's really what leadership is. I always tell, throughout the course of my career, my management team, I'd walk in the room and I would say, look, if I'm the smartest guy in this room, we're effed. Make no mistake about it. Abdicating yourself as a leader to, let's say, your finance person. They're way more experienced, know more about it. Your salesperson, your legal officer. Instead of saying, well, I'm the CEO, I guess I should be telling people what to do. And in that fundamental shift of, some people, it's not servant leadership. It is understanding I'm not the CTO. I'm not going to code a product. I'm not the salesperson. I can't sell it. I'm not the finance or this. You become a band leader, but you have to be able to rely on the advice and the input of the people who are better at it than you. And that is a challenge for somebody who starts a company, because we're all humans, we're ego. And ego is the number one thing I've seen kill every company. Companies I sit on the board of today, companies we invest in, and it's not a bad thing. You need ego to be able to do this and do it again, even if you fail. But abdicating yourself as the leader, and that's really what happens in a SEAL squad. Let's say there are 12 guys. Doesn't matter the rank. If Rick is our greatest free fall parachutist and tactician, he leads that portion of it, gets us on target. If Joe is this, Joe, how we design and to do this, right? It's different than the rest of the military that says, here's my collar rank, this is what we're doing, guys. Not a good way. Nor is that a good way to build a business.
And what you said about SEAL Team 6 is so, I think, generalizable to all of life. When you're saying you're surrounded by the world's best. And I think there's a saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So,
yes.
You always got to be pushing yourself. And I think that's exactly what the SEALs do, is that, yes, you're excellent at what you do, but you're surrounded by people who are just as good, if not better, to constantly push you. And I think that's very generalizable to business, to medicine, to law, all of that. I want to ask you a little bit about your books, which are so tremendous. What was your impetus for writing those 2 books?
That's a great great story. Again, remember, this is the time when the internet is nascent. Call it 2002, 2001, 2002. So I would deploy, you know, sometimes for a certain intel agency, and I had a kit bag, and invariably we'd be stuck in hangars somewhere waiting for a green light to do something. So you would work out and you would read a book, a physical book, and we would pass them around. Well, I was always captivated, interested in human performance, not self-help. Human performance, discipline was something I had learned since a young guy, and I saw it at play in the SEAL teams. And I would read this book, whether it was how to improve this or improve that or improve this. And I'd flip to the back and it would say, you know, PhD Sam Jones from NYU's sociology department. And I would go, what has that guy done to give me any advice on human performance and mental performance? You know, so I would read those and I would go, you know, oh, this sounds a lot like self-discipline. Nobody uses the term anymore. Controlling oneself, one's actions, one's emotion. Control is a relative term. Not only controlling it, but improving it. So by way of example, a lot of people don't know this, but we're taught heavy psychological tools in the SEAL teams. You are to operate in what's called a condition orange. And I won't go through the 4 conditions, but 5 conditions. But suffice to say, if you're red or black, you're incapacitated. It's just so overwhelming. You know, a car bomb goes off and you were shopping in New York City. For most people, it's so overwhelming. Their physiological response, as you know, Doc, is the adrenaline dump, the fight or flight, where they just shut down and they can't hear and see. The idea is you want to operate at condition orange, which is just right on that edge, where you can control your adrenaline dump, your cortisol, your dopamine, and perform at a high level in the most stressful environment. So that takes a lot of training that is at that dangerous edge. It is better than real life constantly, and physiologically, and your body is used to operating at that. Some people call that adrenaline. That's just one part of it. It is that type of environment. They also screen for a very narrow band psychologically that has the ability to move in those. Not much different than stress in business, as you know, Doc, right? You're doing brain surgery. If you took a regular average person, the stress would be overwhelming. They could not perform that. It takes years and years and years of acclimatizing you to operate on a human being when you have life and death in their hands. But it doesn't seem that way to you. And I bet if we hooked you up to a monitor, your physiological response would be half of that as a normal human. Same thing applies to professional combat, right? You'd be shocked how the simile of startups, doing your own business, fighting that fight is so similar. The leadership areas of it. So I said, screw it, I'm going to write a book. It'll have nothing to do with the SEAL teams or classified agencies or any of that. It'll be about self-discipline. How do you build it? Right? People love taglines today, right? Resilience or grit. Yeah, all of those, try to define it. Everybody has a different definition. I'm talking about the ability to control you, your physical, your mental, and improve upon it. You can gain control. So I wrote a book. A lot of it was based upon what I had learned in the SEAL teams, but also growing up on a farm and life in general. And I took snippets from some of the top psychological thought or mental thought in the day. And I thought that was more needed than just somebody else. And by the way, back in those days, almost no SEALs wrote books. So I had to get approval for all of this because it was self-discipline. It wasn't a story about combat. In my fascination with biohacking was born out of improving physical, improving mental, and discipline, right? And there are tools to the trade, as you know, psychologically. So that's what drove me to kind of write those. It seems like 100 years ago.
Single most important take-home point for anyone reading your book?
Number one is there are 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Why? Because we're all individual. So read, take input, apply it how it works for you. Same thing follows with exercise. There's 1,000 ways to get in shape, be healthy, live longer. Do what works for you. So I always advocate there is no one person, no one book, no one expert who has a monopoly on how to do it right. But discipline, if you build discipline, that follows in every way of your life: relationship, business, money, health, family, parenting. All of it starts with your ability to control and then improve that control.
Now let's get into your transition, and we already touched base a little bit, but from SEAL to businessman, was that planned? When did that idea hit your mind as your SEAL career maybe was getting towards the end? Was that your plan all along? How did that work?
That's a great question. As I left SEAL Team 6, I felt like I had been there and done that enough. And if I didn't leave now, I was going to be there another 15 years, which most of the guys do. And I went to work for a government agency, and it was nothing could compare to the hair on fire at SEAL Team 6, regardless of the agency, right? There's bureaucracy. And I began to see a problem that wasn't being solved there, a big problem, which is as the world became more dangerous, more countries became designated as high threat countries. So these agencies need people with my background to help protect and walk people around and do all these things. And it's impossible to do that. You know, you can't recruit. Think of it as contractors. So I said, well, I'm going to take the money from the book, because I was doing a book tour all around the U.S. to start a company that solves this issue. And I told that agency I'm leaving, and they said, hey, before you leave, can you get 30 guys? I said, I didn't know what payroll was. I didn't know what EBITDA was. I didn't know anything. So I double mortgaged my house. And luckily, I had a good mentor who had been there at 40 years as like a contracting officer, and took me under his wing and said, here's how you can do this, Mike. And off I went. It was about solving a problem that I saw that nobody was solving. And I also knew there's no way I could work for somebody. I would be the world's worst. And naivety can be a power. Sometimes people overthink things. I talk to people every day that talk about starting a business, a technology firm, engineers out of the Valley. And what you'll see is there's a small percentage that actually have what it takes to go do that. A lot of people will talk about it, but making that leap, it doesn't matter if you have 2 young kids or you're single, it's still a hurdle. To me, the risk that I had taken on over my life was so much greater, or I didn't perceive it that way. So think of it this way. A lot of the psychologists in the SEAL teams liken it to this. If you could imagine all of us humans, Doc, walking around this earth, have an imaginary yardstick, you know, those wooden yardsticks. And on each of ours, there's a mark, call it the high water mark, of some traumatic or experience, car accident, death of a loved one, a divorce. And that impacts you up here. So that's kind of the highest one. You were in a car accident, you lost a leg, whatever. Invisibly, all of us walk around with some watermark of something that happened to us that we were able to handle or didn't handle. In the SEAL teams, your watermark is at the very top and it keeps pushing it. So when I got out into quote unquote normal world society, my idea of risk wasn't even close, even to this day. It's like, oh, I'll start this, and if I lose it all, I'll do it again. So being naive in some ways, and naive may not be the right word, added with a risk quotient that is up here, I never thought of double mortgage in the house and doing this company. If it fails, I'll do it again. And so I think in a lot of ways, many of the people that you even know, Rick, are always talking to you about starting a business, and you know they never will. And that's okay. They don't have to be a productive person. But a very few percent will. They're willing to take that risk, and their gauge of their watermark is a little bit higher than people when you talk to them. And so that's kind of how I liken it in common terms for why risk and sometimes not knowing everything is an advantage.
But I mean, you're talking about risk, and just to put it in perspective, you didn't even graduate college. No. So you didn't have a college degree. Did you have any formal business training before you started these companies?
Well, it's iterative, right? I started the defense firm. I got lucky. It sold. I made a bunch of money. Nobody, when I got into tech, so I did one defense firm, 5 CEO founder as a cyber technology CEO, including Silent Circle and Blackphone and a couple of those, where today now I co-founded a venture firm, very different. There's nobody in the world that was going to invest in former SEAL Team 6 guys, especially even though I built a billion-dollar defense firm. Didn't matter. Didn't have a college degree, this, right? So that's kind of the tech barrier, right? I wasn't an engineer. So I used my own money to start it. And I convinced Phil Zimmerman, basically the creator of PGP encryption in the Internet Hall of Fame, and Apple's chief cryptographer, to jump with me to do this. And then from there, once you have some success, I started others. Some left the smoking crater of other people's capital. And what I tell CEOs to this day that I work with every day, that's generally my job, taking young entrepreneurs in these fast-moving companies and trying to help every day them do the job better. I always liken it to, I could not tell you, Rick, there wouldn't be much I could say about the companies I founded that ended spectacularly. Everybody made money and it was a big success. I'm not sure. But the ones that I crashed and burned, I could speak for days on. What I would do different, mistakes I made. I don't want to do that again, right? Timing. And so there's a lot of ego in this venture technology startup world, rightfully so. But it's really hard to get good advice, isn't the right word, roadmaps, a map. My value is I can say, I did that and it turned out disaster. Don't do that. Here's another way to do it. So now going through all those experiences puts me in a position where what we do is build some of the most prominent cyber and data science companies in the world. And they come out of the classified space. But we build commercial. So our companies, we want them to have around 85% commercial of their revenue, 15 to gov. And several of these are going IPO, 1,000 employees, things like that. And so the experience I've gotten now going on 8 years as a venture capitalist and building these companies, I directly put back in. There's an old saying, and we used to use it in SEAL teams. Looking back at the past can have some valuable experiences to draw on. Just don't stare at it. A lot of people that have a failure can never recover because they're constantly focused on that past. The flip side is, if you failed a few times and been successful, you can now help others by focusing on not or doing the things you did wrong. So don't dwell in the past. Use it as valuable. Don't stare at it. And that's always helped me.
But just giving people perspective, right? You've been incredibly successful at these startup companies, venture capitalists. You've started numerous multi-billion-dollar companies, really. Yeah. Whereas the rate of startups for most people is dismal. So
Yeah.
what do you attribute your incredible success as an entrepreneur to?
First thing is not me, number one. Number two, my co-founder and I saw that there was a problem not being solved in venture. Again, most of these things stem from we see a problem that's not being solved. And my co-founder has been in Sand Hill Road, Silicon Valley, 20 years. He started the very first cybersecurity venture firm. So he had lessons learned. And what we saw was that the new cutting edge technology, more specifically in cybersecurity, was coming out of the classified agencies. Why? Because of offense. Offensive learnings turn to defense. Let me give you an example. Rick and I are top senior programmers, engineers at the NSA, as an example. And we're in charge of a team. And our job is to penetrate the boardroom polycom, conference call speaker of the Chinese. So we come up with some hack, we do it, and then we realize, holy shit, the whole world's susceptible to this. We bring them out and build a defensive version of it because there isn't one. And so we knew we had to move it to the DC area to be around those technical agencies, and we needed a different approach. So we have a team of 7 highly experienced former CEOs, 3-time CMOs. They already made a lot of their money. When we invest in a company, we move them into our facility and we embed. It's all about an unfair fight. My whole life has been that. I'm not interested in fighting fair. I want to stack the deck. I want the best night vision goggles, body armor, the best weapons, helicopters, and guys around me. Taking that principle, this is why we only do 4 a year. We see 400. We choose 4 because it's a heavy lift. Our success ratio is the opposite of venture. Venture shoots for 10% of their investments to go big. We're 90. We've had 2 failures in 25. Because of this very bespoke, I like to say we're a sniper shot as opposed to a shotgun approach. So it's more about the team we have, and the model we have. It's a very different model. I'm not saying it's the way to do it, Doc. It's a way, and to date, our success speaks for itself. We have the highest success rate in all of cyber investing for the last 3 to 4 years straight. The other thing I would say is be true to who you are. Don't chase money. Companies are bought. They're not sold. So if I meet a founder that says, man, I think I can make 200 million off this, not for me. Along the way to building something unique and valuable and dominant, companies get bought. So all of this learnings is why we're so different than regular venture. I hope that describes it in layman's terms a little better.
No, I mean, it does. And I think as you were describing that, I saw another parallel. It seems like between SEAL Team 6 and being an entrepreneur, it seems like as a SEAL, you have to be able to adapt to variability. Obviously, circumstances change, battles change, and you have to adapt and be flexible. How important is adaptability and flexibility in the business realm?
Number 2 out of 5 high traits that you need to have. And this is tough for some people because you can be dogmatic about the way you thought it was going to go. And you can hold on to that as you spiral in and leave a burning crater, right? Your ability to pivot on a dime as new information comes in is critical. And why I love this in the startup world is because you have a limited amount of capital to get to the next step. And so you have to literally in 24 hours go, look, we were wrong on that. Let's sell this product or this way. And that can be hard on people. Really fast change requires split-second kind of decisions. Now, in the startup world, is different than combat. Split second can be 3 days, right? That type of change adds the cortisol, adds the stress, adds to it. People try to avoid that. So sometimes avoiding decisions is a self-preservation mechanism born in humans. And you know this, Doc, we still have our lizard brain from the pons medulla on up that we've had for 200,000 years. And sometimes that drives a lot of our behaviors unbeknownst to us. Fight or flight, time to eat, procreate. Same applies with self-preservation. Believe it or not, in the business world, those traits exhibit themselves in avoiding a decision, avoiding a conflict, just shutting down. You can't do that. So your ability to be versatile, move, is what determines your success. I always say the road is littered with the bodies of the best and smartest technologists because they weren't able to change fast enough. And that's true to this day.
What would you say about when you look at kind of serial entrepreneurs, people who have changed the way business works? You always think of Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and they're really labeled as visionaries. What made them so special?
I love that question. And throughout my career, I've been introduced to a lot of people like that. Very similar things. Their ability physiologically and mentally not to become completely crushed from a failure, a higher risk tolerance combined with naivety. If you dig into a topic and you become the expert in it, there are enough reasons why to say no. If you have a vision, this is the way things are done today. Here is where I think Valhalla is for a company and for humanity and for technology. That gap from the way things are done today to here, you have a vision, is about surrounding yourself with people smarter than you that can help you do that. If you look at Gates, if you look at Musk, if you look at those people, around them is an army of some of the most competent, smartest people. They provide the vision. These people say, here's how we can get there, boss. And they let them do it. When the vision and what's being worked on gets separated, a good leader says, okay, everybody, back here. The vision is shifted a little bit, but here's the vision. That's a big difference between somebody who needs constant control. There's an old adage I like to tell founders all the time. You can be rich or you can be king. You can't be both. Rich means you abdicate yourself, take input from the smarter people in it, change your vision as it goes, or the direction to how to get to that vision. The other side I see probably at least 60% of the time is people want control. I'm the CEO. I want to control this. Never works out. Control and building something of value and substance for the world don't go hand in hand. Each of those visionaries you talk about are adept and amazing at giving up some control in order to direct people to this vision. Autonomous driving cars, space, right? And look, there's innovation in amazing places. You and I are talking on a smartphone to people all over the world. That was a vision. That same person that had that vision didn't design the tech and program it. They surrounded themselves with the people who could do it.
Now, let me ask you a question. You've been ultra successful in every aspect of your career, whether it's combat as a Navy SEAL, author writing books, entrepreneur starting mega companies. What is the single most important attribute that you would say is responsible for that success?
Work on yourself. In other words, we're all so different. We all have flat sides or baggage that we bring into it. But you cannot progress. You cannot do things greater until you bring some level of a system. I call it an operating system. Just like we have on this phone. It's Apple's iOS operating system. Develop an operating system. And pretty soon you'll see, well, for me to do X, I need to get up earlier. I should take care of my health. I'm 300 pounds or whatever. I'm shy in front of people. When you begin looking at yourself as an operating system, you can begin to address these areas that hold you back. If you don't ever do that yourself, you will never progress. A CEO, think of today where I was my first, my second, even my fourth one. I knew so little, although I thought I knew so much. My ability to look at back, what am I bad at? Observing good CEOs, saying, I want to mimic that. Good leaders, right? I'll give you an example, Doc. You have one of the most prolific social media outreach. I look at some of your guests and I feel humbled to be on here. How does a brain surgeon figure that out? Well, you worked on an area you didn't know. You didn't work. You surrounded yourself with social media people better than you. And look at it now. You led with a vision on what you wanted it to be. You had to first work on yourself. And you probably still do it to this day. I do as well. And what I've also found is, for those of you who are married or in relationships, work on that first. If you have a good partner, they'll help you identify the areas that you may not know, right? And that's helpful. But you have to be in a position where you can take that on, evaluate it without your ego going, screw you. That's the number one secret. I have CEOs today that I met when they just came out of the NSA. They are now the CEO of a 1,000-person company. They have lost weight. They have now a better relationship. They have 2 children. They were smarter at finance. They now can sit with Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan and talk finance. But where they started was clay, and they said, I want to work on this. This is what I want to be, and I want my company to be. These are the things I need to work on as a person to help me get there. If you don't have that, your company won't progress, you won't progress, and by the way, you can't help your direct reports because you're not working on you.
Let me ask you a question, because you're so driven and so goal-oriented. Who is your role model and what inspires you?
Wow, I have role models in different areas, right? I understand that a lot of who I am today, mentally, discipline-wise, and risk-wise, comes from my experiences in the SEAL teams. So there are several SEALs that, they're not best-selling authors and on Fox News that inspire me and have mentored me in personal improving things there. In business, there are a tremendous amount of people. One of my best friends, who is the godfather of my daughter, is one of the co-founders of Shopify. I have learned so much from him in different parts of how to be a man, how to run a large organization, how to be creative. And he would be great for your podcast, right? It's from a different perspective. And so I'm able to pick and choose things from people I admire that will help me overcome some of my failings. My wife, believe it or not, I know that's a cliche and it sounds corny, but you met my wife. I think she was on your podcast, former Secret Service. Look, my wife's a PhD, top psychologist. I don't have a college degree. So that dichotomy, it's corny to say, but I see things in her that I admire and I wish I could be better at talking to people, better explaining things, helping people more, evaluating a room better, which would in turn is self-serving, would help me evaluate CEOs better, evaluate people better. So when you think about people that inspire you and mentor, to me, mentor is a little different than where you can draw these inspiration and say, look at where they're at and what they're capable of. If I could just have a third of that capability, it would make me way better. So I always look in a health environment, right? I have friends that are top longevity doctors, some of them, Rick, and to help me understand physiologically as I age now at 55, how can I perform better both mentally to help CEOs of our startups and investing as a husband and father, but in business. So you have to have these inspirational people that are in different areas, right? Some people choose a guru that gives them advice on their whole life, business and life. That's dangerous. Do that for your spiritual or your mental. Pick somebody that you can relate to in business and get advice. And so that's kind of how I approach it, Doc, as a city boy without a college degree that came from where I am. The other thing I found is take advice loosely. A lot of times humans want to give you advice, and I see this a lot in the business world, because they made money or they name drop and know somebody. It does not mean that their walk is at all relevant to yours. So approach these things as, I want to grab that capability or that superpower from this person, but I don't need them redesigning my business plan.
Single most important piece of advice you would give anyone listening who wants to be an entrepreneur?
I love that. And I get asked that a lot. Never, ever equate the value of what you're going to try to do or the failure of what you're going to try to do with your self-worth. In other words, what stops a lot of people from I call it burning the boats at the beach, right? You're all in, there's no going back, is the fear of what happens if it fails. Now, me as a person is a failure. You have to separate the two. Very hard to do. Learn how to separate the success or failure of your business from the success or failure of you as a human. And if you can talk to people about that, it starts to make them more comfortable with taking some risks and making decisions. And so my process, starting with a brand new first-time CEO that gets $3 million from us, is working more on that. Don't be afraid to make brash decisions. You've already burnt the boats at the beach. Who cares? Go for it. And along the way, if I can see they're struggling in the business, I spend a lot of time talking to them. That's not you. It's not a direct reflection of your self-worth. It's timing, it's industry, it's competitors, it's all those things. But it's the number one advice I give entrepreneurs. Not just do it, not just Nike slogan, but think as you as a person. Separate your self-worth from that. And that'll allow you in a career to have just as many failures as if you had success. But you're not less of a person. And that's the number one fear I see with people.
I would say that, Mike, just because I could talk to you for days, and I got to actually wrap this up, even though I want to continue talking to you. Such an amazing interview. I would say that take-home points, at least for me, someone like yourself, so successful at everything that he's done. To me, what strikes me is your self-discipline and your focus. Everyone assumes that from a Navy SEAL, of course, but how that transitions into being an amazing author and a serial successful entrepreneur, I think the take-home point here is that anything worth doing in life is worth focus, discipline, and that drive that clearly you have. And I think that's the big take-home point for everyone, because not everyone's going to be a Navy SEAL or a doctor or an entrepreneur, but success in life, all of life, requires self-discipline and focus. And you're just an amazing example of that.
Well, thank you, Doc. And by the way, you are too, or I wouldn't be here. I mean, yours is a lot longer than mine, your list of accomplishments. And I'm honored to be on it. I love what you're doing. I think that there's authenticity is the most important thing, I think, at this stage. I don't have a college degree. I'm still a knucklehead. So I don't know everything. But when you're authentic, just like you are and other people in business, it changes the way people perceive you.
Yeah. Well said. You got to be yourself, follow your passion, and stay focused. So, Mike, amazing interview. Really appreciate all your time, and have a great weekend.
Honored, Doc. Thanks for having me.
All right, bud. Talk soon.